Crucible trees offer a lot of fun and unique ideas. Furthermore, many of them are incredibly powerful. Some of the builds that will see this league are going to break the meta. Many others already have. And while yes, some of these are high budget options, others are a lot more affordable. So there's going to be quite a bit of variety. However, because all of these builds rely on specific Crucible trees, it's going to take a bit of work to get them up and running. And there's something that you might not be able to play in a future league, things that are truly uniquely Crucible, and therefore kind of special, because it's been a very long time since we've had builds unique to a league. Sure, you could argue Original Sin, or you could argue some crazy plus gems thing, but those weren't necessarily intentionally unique to the league, things that were completely and utterly different from anything you could do before. The last time we had so many unique builds, at least that I can remember, was Heist, and then before that, when Cluster Jewels were added way back in Delirium. So today, I want to talk about the meta breakers, the builds that stand out to me as things worth exploring, and some of the ways in which people are doing it. Which, first up, we have the Explodey Totem build. If you've watched Zizaran's recent video, then you've definitely seen this one before. And I have to say right up front, I think this build is being overhyped. It does a lot of damage. Admittedly, that damage isn't visible on Pewee Ninja, because Rejuvenation Totem normally doesn't do DPS, but causing it to explode for a massive percentage of its life, and pumping up its level using things like Empower, putting it in a trap to give it actual damage scaling, and then making it poison, because at that point, why not, is certainly a way to do a lot of damage for very little effort. Unfortunately, the problem here is you're playing a delayed build. You throw traps that summon totems beyond your limit that explode to poison enemies. It's Seismic Trap, but with extra steps, and possibly more damage than the original had. So on the one hand, if you're in Solo Self-Found, you're in Solo Self-Found Hardcore, or maybe you're trying to kill Uber bosses in Ruthless, this is a great build to consider. If you want something that maps quickly, feels great to play, and is an all-rounder, then you should absolutely avoid this build. But it's cool nonetheless. Not because of the amount of damage it does. It's cool due to being a uniquely Crucible build. You need a weapon with a totem mod, and that's something that hasn't existed before and may not exist after. So just to go over a couple things quickly, what are some choices being made in this build, and are they things that I find interesting or things I'd maybe do a little differently? The first thing that catches my eye is the Lightning Coil and Taste of Hate combo. If you're playing a Pathfinder, which we are here, then this is great. You always want to see Fizz taken as, because that way you don't need very much armor, or in many cases, you don't need armor at all. Now, personally, would I end up sticking with 65% of Fizz taken as Ellie and not getting at least a little more armor? No. Personally, I think I'd much rather replace the Quartz Flask with an Armor Flask and get my suppression elsewhere, just because that armor is going to be super impactful given how little of your Fizz damage you're taking as Fizz. But nonetheless, it's still pretty nice. Now, we're also not life tapping here. Instead, we're getting around those costs entirely by using Slave Driver's Hands. These are the premier gloves for a lot of trappers, since you get all sorts of charge generation. You'll have to be careful which altars you click. On the other hand, you get a lot of free damage, and in this case, crit doesn't work, but hey, at least there's endurance charges for defenses. And overall, this setup's pretty darn budget, which is what I wanted to highlight about this build. It gets going on a budget. That's why I mentioned that it's quite good for Solo Self-Found or Hardcore. Alright, sure, maybe a poison deals damage faster, chaos damage over time bow isn't exactly the cheapest thing. The build doesn't need it. In fact, I'm pretty sure this build has enough damage to kill bosses, even if you scoured the bow and just went with that. Though I don't particularly advise it, since then your damage is going to feel even worse since it's double delayed to begin with. Again, my problems with this build aren't the objective metrics, rather how it feels to play. And if you want to know more about how the build looks to play, I suggest checking out Zizaran's video after this one. Next up, we have a build for people who dislike seeing the screen. Blazing Salvo, cast on crit. There's a Crucible node that causes Blazing Salvo to fork when passing through Flame Wall, and so with 2 of them, then we doubled it. This means that your Blazing Salvo projectiles fork and then fork again for a massive amount of lag and a proportional amount of damage. Hopefully you don't plan on seeing the screen, because that won't be happening. In fact, I suggest getting a pair of sunglasses if you plan to play this build, because otherwise you won't be seeing very much at all. Now, when it comes to your ascendancy, there's a good bit of flexibility. Milky's a bit of a donut and went assassin, even though it gave him nothing. Don't take my word for that. He told me to say that specifically. And if you want to know more about the build, you should go subscribe to him over on YouTube so that you don't miss his upcoming video on it. But if you wanted a real ascendancy, then Trickster's the play, or if you're feeling spicy, definitely go with Deadeye, or ultimately go with whatever Milky says in his video, cause I'm just guessing here based on what he told me. Now, coming over to PoE Ninja, here we have the build. Again, we've got a really nice defensive setup from Cloak of Flame for Fizz taken as, and we're using Leadership's Price. This means max LE res, which is great, and an extra layer of defense through Sap. Think of that as kind of sort of the Fortify we have at home. Plus, we're fixing crit, and lowering enemy resistances with Scorch. All around, Leadership's Price is kind of a pain to use. You have to balance your two highest resists, but is absolutely great. Now, this weapon's going to have the Blazing Salvo mod, and aside of that, it's just a pretty darn good caster wand. Since we are a cast on crit build, of course there are attack stats such as crit strike chance and attack speed, but the prefixes are caster all the way, with the very nice hybrid spell damage and non-chaos as extra. Plus, over for the shield, it's life, it's ES, what else could you ask for? I mean, I guess maybe not the stun block recovery, but hey, everything can't be perfect, and this is a damn good shield. Don't let these numbers fool you. This build has a lot more damage than it looks like, since this doesn't count the forks, the projectile overlaps, or the amount of damage gained by passing through Flame Wall. Plus defensively, we've got some cheeky spell suppression, so again, it's going to be far more tanky than it might first appear. Luckily, we're in exactly the right part of a tree for all the projectile nonsense, and all the spell suppression that you'd ever need. So overall, this is a really cool build that could actually act as a replacement for the Nimbus cast on crit fireball build, which was really awesome at the end of last league, and then unfortunately kind of got murdered by the patch notes. Rip to that build. And be sure to put an F for Palstron in the chat, or I guess down in the comments below. And then next up, we have a build that's been getting a ton of attention. The Spectral Shield Throw, aka Big Shield build. This got a lot of attention because it cost Captain Lance 12,000 chance orbs along with the tattered remnants of his sanity, and he still didn't get the item he wanted. Spectral Shield Throw or Shield Crush have been strong for quite a while now, and Crucible makes them truly insane. But why is that? Well, it's this item here, Emperor's Vigilance. On the one hand, I have to warn you right off the bat, Emperor's Vigilance can cost you defensively, because it says that damage taken from unblocked hits always bypasses Energy Shield. This means if you take too many consecutive unblocked hits, you will kind of go splat, and this build wouldn't be the greatest for Uber bosses as a result. Or at least it wouldn't be the greatest for Uber bosses if it didn't annihilate them instantly. Next up, the Emperor's Vigilance has a lot of ES. And by a lot of ES, in this case, I mean 717, though with a perfect Crucible tree, it can get up to 1,000. Now normally, Spectral Shield Throw or Shield Crush inherits base damage from your shield, specifically based off of the armor or evasion rating. However, that's where this gets truly insane, and why Captain Lance lost his sanity trying to chance a unique that is quite rare. With the Emperor's Vigilance, you can get all of that scaling from your energy shield via a new Crucible node that causes Spectral Shield Throw and Shield Crush to scale off of Energy Shield and have their damage converted over to Lightning, rather than scale off of physical and gain Fizz for armor and evasion. Combine that with Phantasmal and you're getting a massive 140 to 200% crit multi. Now, the build says here that it does 3.5 mil. But that's 3.5 mil, not counting the scaling off of Energy Shield. That's 3.5 mil, not counting the fact that it's actually doing lightning damage. In other words, it's scaling off of these supports, which aren't even being accounted for. No, this build does far more damage than it looks, and unfortunately is a little bit difficult to simulate in PoB. You can do it, but it absolutely takes some effort. Now for me personally, it's not something I'd play, just because I don't like how Spectral Shield Throw feels. I can make anything work, so I'd rather have a build that feels good to play than one that simply has good numbers. However, if you don't mind how SST feels, or if you want to play a Shield Crush version, then this is absolutely something that you can polish and min-max. However, do be aware that it can get a little rippy, as I mentioned, if you take 2 unblocked hits, so especially be careful of anything that reduces or negates your ability to block. And last but not least, another interesting kind of conversion skill, Poison Artillery Ballista. In this case, it doesn't convert so much as it applies damage where it normally wouldn't be, because normally you need Fizz or Chaos damage to poison. In this case, though, elemental damage can poison for Blast Rain and Artillery Ballista, which when combined with a really big juicy Ellie bow like we see here, gets really, really cool. For a basic weapon, you can go for something like this, though ultimately something that has poison deals damage faster, and maybe some chaos.multi as suffixes could be absolutely worth your time as well. Now, if you want to know my personal take on this build, then I suggest you get subscribed, since I'm going to be making this in the near future as my second character of the league. But if you want to see what other people are doing, then be sure to look around for a few key metrics. First off, using Artillery Ballista. Second of all, scaling both elemental and poison stuff, with stuff like Unbound Ailment support plus elemental damage to attacks, and also maybe consider looking at a champion, because champion is a really nice defensive option. You get free inbuilt Fortify, and honestly, if you're running Asenaths, you might not really notice the difference in clear between that and Pathfinder anyway. The main reason that I haven't re-rolled the build is because I spend too long polishing Righteous Fire. By the way, my fully polished endgame min-max Righteous Fire is going to come out very soon, but also because I wasn't quite sure which direction I wanted to take it. Do I play a Poison Pathfinder, which will feel really good and be kind of speedy, or do I play a champion that might be a little slower, a much better boss killer, and ultimately feel stronger, potentially, with Wilma's? I'm not sure. I guess you'll just have to see what the future brings, because I haven't decided for myself. And given that you can only scale so much damage, eventually you'll have to start looking at your defenses anyway, since you can't exceed the dot cap. Combined with a very high level of damage automation from dropping Artillery Ballista, then this could very well be a great choice for Uber boss killing. I'll have to explore that myself when I play the build. For now though, I'm just going to say that both of these are worth checking out, and like everything else I've talked about, it's really cool to see builds that wouldn't have been possible before, which are being enabled strictly by Crucible. And those are 4 builds created from Crucible passives. Some of these, like Artillery Ballista, Blazing Salvo, and Spectral Shield Throw, were playable before, but got more power and new ways to scale their damage. Others, like Explodey Totems, are completely new, but all of them are kind of insane. These are some of the strongest builds we've seen in a long time, and this only scratches the surface of what Crucible can bring. There could very well be a build stronger than all the things I talked about today, which just hasn't come to light since there's so many combinations of Crucible passives. And given how many people don't play melee, my bet is it's probably on some random melee skill that no one's looked at in 5 years, like, let's just say, Pestilent Strike. And so I'm curious, what's the coolest Crucible-enabled build that you've seen so far? And do you think any of these will stick around? We're starting to see clips of people almost insta-gibbing Uber bosses, more power creep than we've seen in a very long time. For me personally, I think that means a lot of these are probably going away, but I also hope they don't. I hope that at least some of these ideas stick around. I'd love to see Artillery Ballista Poison stay. I think that the totem build's really cool and maybe could be a new skill. Or at the very least, a rework to Torch Oak Grove. And while Blazing Salvo might not be the best to look at, it's certainly a very cool thing mechanically, though not something that I'd ever want to play for myself. But with that said, what are your thoughts on Crucible, and maybe some of the builds that have been brought so far? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. And of course, before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for their continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible. If you want something else to watch, maybe check out Ziz's video on Explodey Totems, my previous Week 1 meta wrap-up where I talked about the most popular builds, Milky's video, if it's out, his YouTube channel will be linked below, or you can always go read the meta news reports over at Maxwell GG. With that said, thanks for watching, I look forward to more cool builds, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.